You hear that? Good.
והכהנים והעם העומדים בעזרה כשהיינו שומעים את שם השם המפורש יוצא מפי כהן גדול היו קוראים משתחווים ונופלים על פניהם ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
Welcome, everybody. I just had to, let's stop sharing my sound. Hi, everyone. Great to see you. I just had to start with the music today to get us all into the mood. So it is wonderful to see you here. We're so lucky that we get to learn from our teacher, Brad Artson. I will put in the chat in just a moment the text that we sent out earlier so you can access it either from your email or from the chat. We'll keep the screen this way so we can all see each other. This will be sent out to us afterwards via email and eventually, God willing, also on our site. And if you have any questions or need anything, I'm here, let me know. And with that, Brad, thank you for being our teacher today.
Great, thank you. It is so good to see all of you, and I'm so glad that we can do this together. As I was mentioning to Ilana just a few moments ago, this is out of my normal range of teaching. Not to say that I don't teach prophets, I do, but to teach it in terms of what does it mean to find hope and calm and joy? And what does it mean to try to get a handle on anxiety and depression and anger? That has been a good deal of my efforts this past year. So I want to start personal and then go into this liturgy together. There is an epidemic out in the world of anxiety and of fear and of rage. And we see it every day in the news, and I imagine most of us see it every day in our daily lives as well. It's off the charts. Undergraduates who walk around with depression all the time and anxiety at a level that's clinical and never before measured. I think that's true in many of our own lives as well. There's just a sense of foreboding and doom and intolerance that's weighing heavily on all of us. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking and reading about what are the tools that we have available to us to be able to get a handle on that. And it does seem like the upcoming holidays and the season of teshuvah is a time of turning away from anxiety and fear and rage. And of course, that's easy to say. How do you do that? And so I've been reading, I guess, with that as my filter, and that meant that this year, looking over the Haftarah of the prophet Isaiah, I just saw all kinds of resources in it for psycho-spiritual health. And that's what I want our focus to be, right? So we're not looking at this the way we often do. I'm not looking at it historically. I'm not looking at it critically. I'm not looking at it in its context or what does archaeology have to say, all of which are very interesting and valuable. I want to look at this in terms of what are the ways that the prophecy invites us into a kind of thriving, rootedness, a sense of wholeness and abundance. Okay, and so that we're reading for that, right? I also would love for this to be as interactive as you're willing to be. So if you have something you want to say or you want to ask the group or ask me, you can either just speak out or raise your hand either physically or on the Zoom or put it in the chat. And I really don't hesitate. You'll help us enrich this if we're all there together and we're all sharing with each other. This is not an expert talking. This is just me. Okay, so here we go. The other thing, the text I gave you is in no way special. So if you'd rather read this from a Machzor or a Chumash, you're welcome to do that as well. It's still Isaiah 57:14 where it begins, and there are many possible copies of it, although mine has the Koran print, so that's, cool. All right, ready? Here we go. So build up a highway. I'm going to do it in English just so we save a little time, but you have the Hebrew original there as well. Clear a road, remove all obstacles from the road of my people. So the first thing that strikes me about this opening is he's offering us both a recognition of a problem and an affirmation that there's something to do about it, right? There's a road that needs clearing. There are obstacles that are in our way. Literally, it's a metaphor of a lack of forward motion, but one in which you can see where you want to be going. Right? And that feels so powerful existentially, like we're all in such a place. We are all knowing where we'd like to be. If it weren't for this, this, and this, then I would know peace. If it weren't for this challenge, I'd be fine. Right? And so the first thing that the prophet is sharing with us is that there is a michshol. There's an impediment stopping us from getting to where we're going. And here I want to highlight the impediment can be one of two kinds. It can be internal or external, meaning we often, by the way we process our challenges, add to the obstacle. And that part we have an immediate ability to recognize and modify. And then there are in all of our lives real obstacles external to us. And there the option isn't always to move it out of the way. Sometimes it means you have to deal with it. And that may mean going through something painful or inconvenient or an assault of some kind. It might mean finding a way to contain it or to minimize it. He's not laying it out. He's just saying, we have an agenda here, solu. We need to find a way to bring clarity to the road. And that clarity is both of Havana, of understanding, and it's a clarity of get that thing off the road so that we can be moving forward again. That feels like a great image for where many of us are at, and frankly, where many of our people are at, which is they can see the road, they can see the path on the other side of the obstacle. They just don't know what to do to get that obstacle cleared, right? And so for many of us, we're in that spot. And I think how brilliant of Isaiah to get that and to lay that out at the very beginning. But I don't want us to see this as a message of despair, because it's not. The implicit message underneath what he's saying is you can do this. There is a way to clear the obstacle. There is a way to be able to move forward again. For thus said the one who is high aloft forever dwells, whose name is holy. I dwell on high in holiness, yet with the contrite and lowly in spirit, reviving the spirits of the lowly, reviving the hearts of the contrite. So what do you make of the fact that Isaiah, like many of us, when we think of the divine, we think up there separate, right? Because that's what he's doing. On high means I'm above the fray that you all are dealing with. I'm not in it, right? And what's unique about this portrayal of the divine is not God's distance, but what God says immediately afterwards, right? That it may be that God is way up above, but God is with the contrite and the lowly, right? So this is a God who voluntarily gets in the mess, gets in the muck. And I wonder if any of you have thoughts on what does it mean to look for the divine in the messiness, in the brokenness, not in the pomp and the glory. This isn't cathedral religion here. This is Stiebel religion, right? This is any room, however humble, can be a place that the holy can enter if our hearts are sufficiently broken and we turn, right? And how extraordinary, forgot to say that. And I want to highlight that for you, okay? And I want to highlight that with a historical thought, notice. Last year, one of the things I did for myself was I let myself read the Iliad and the Odyssey, which I haven't done since, I don't know, high school. They're great books. I highly recommend it. What was striking to me is not once in either of those two books does a commoner speak. Not once. Everyone who speaks in that book is nobility. Even the slaves who speak are kidnapped royalty, right? Because it does, so Catherine just put in, I read a bit of Emily Wilson's translation. It's amazing. I won't say it replaces other ones because they're all very interesting, but she brings a fresh voice to it. So if you're interested in reading the Odyssey, either Richmond Lattimore is the kind of classic, dignified, and really poetic. Emily Wilson's is equally knock your socks off. I recommend. So thank you, Catherine. That's a great recommendation. All right. But even in that great translation, there's not a single commoner who talks, because it doesn't occur to Homer or his audience that the gods would care about everyday people. So I want you to recognize the revolution here. Sorry, Deborah, I just saw your hand. So in 1 second, it's you. The revolution that Isaiah is part of, which is the Tanakh revolution, is that however lofty our images of the divine, that divine is manifest with the lowly and the broken. That's unprecedented. You won't find that in any ancient literature. Deborah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just on my phone. Okay, great. Well, so I'm actually recalling a teaching that I either learned directly from you in a setting like this, or from someone else in your name, about being a rabbi, which is that people want their rabbis to be above the fray and to be outside of the rat race and to not be caught up in all the Soros and Mishigas that they're caught up in, which is challenging, not only because of what you're saying, but because the role is so complex and time consuming and, doesn't allow for the kind of balanced and thoughtful approach that you're thinking of. Anyways, just a thought of how to do
great.
both. Obviously,
so thank you for the chance to revisit that. I have no idea what young Brad meant by that, but here's what contemporary Brad thinks. Above the fray does not mean indifferent, and it doesn't mean that you're not human. I have always had a permeable membrane between Brad and Rabbi Artson, both for good and for bad. But I do think that humanizes me in a way that makes my teachings useful and accessible more often than not. But it does mean that I need to be a presence of calm and of hope. Right? So the Brad who is utterly despairing, I save that for Ilana and for Molly, who is my dog. But for when I'm rabbiing, people need me to be resilient. So I'm not here suggesting we be impassive. We don't have feelings. We don't have emotions. We don't have imperfections, for sure. We do have all of those, and I don't try to hide them. But what I do try to always embody is a sense of we can do this. We have the ability between God, tradition, the people we love, our own spirituality, us. We have the capacity to face what we need to face, right? And in that sense, Deborah, I do think rabbis are expected to be bastions of hope and resilience. Does that help, Deborah? I'll take that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm walking my dog right now, so
Excellent.
I had to get my button. But thank you, that was helpful.
Okay, great. All right. Any other thoughts right now before we go on? Okay, feel free to interrupt at any point. So So the paradox of God is on high and yet with the lowly. And that's the part the audience would have heard, right? No one's surprised by a God who's on high, but everyone would be surprised by a God who actually cares about the lowly in spirit. And that's not just to watch them be low. It's not to look at their expressions. It's to revive them. It's helping them hold together. So God comes to it with an agenda of relationship and of strength. For I will not always contend, I will not be angry forever. I who make spirits flag also create the breath of life. Now, here, Isaiah's theology and mine differ a bit, and that's okay. Isaiah wants to say that the one who is making your spirits flag is God, and that you're right to feel sad and depressed because God's pissed, right? So whether we believe that or not, I want to take seriously Isaiah and God saying, the stuff that's happening to you that's making you feel bad is real. It's really bad. And there'll be plenty of theologians and therapists who will try to cheer you up by telling you there are no tragedies, there are only lessons to be learned. That's ridiculous. There are tragedies. Sometimes we can salvage a lesson out of them. That doesn't mean they're not tragic. Right? And sometimes feeling crappy or depressed is actually because you're noticing what's going on. So do me the kindness, you theologians and false therapists, and stop trying to be chipper all the time. There's something really sick about constant chipper. My friend Melissa Crespi has pointed that out to me with waiters and waitresses in California who bring excessive chipperness that offends her New Jersey realism. So, but here God is owning that, right? So I think what that's doing for me is that Isaiah's giving us permission to recognize that there are things that it's legitimate to feel bad about, right? That those feelings of anger, of rage, of being run over, hit by a truck, that's part of being alive. And you have the right to have those feelings. And they're not crazy and they're not wrong. And it doesn't mean you don't get the spirituality. It means you're awake, you're attentive, and you're honest. But there's also a promise in here, it won't last. And that's one of the challenges in dealing with anxiety or rage or depression, is there's a sense while you're in it that this is the new permanent reality. And so Isaiah speaks against that. No, it's not. You moved into rage, depression, anxiety, you'll move out of it again. It's not going to last forever. It is not the entirety of your world, right? And so that permission is important to share with people. For their sinful greed, I was angry. I struck them and turned away in my wrath. Though stubborn, they followed the way of their hearts. What is Isaiah saying here? Right? That stubbornness is that we are creatures of habit. And here I'd like to hold out one example of that. All of us in childhood go through traumas of one degree or another. And all of us in our childhood develop patterns to respond to them. And we come up with the best we can, right? We figure out a way to survive our teen years, to survive our childhood, to survive our youth. And then the problem is those patterns get hard-baked. And we carry them into our adult life where they're no longer constructive. They're no longer helping us. They're just a remnant of an earlier response. I think that's what Isaiah is getting at when he talks about those stubborn, where they follow the ways of their hearts, right? So the people of Israel, in the earliest stages of our history, we developed certain ways of responding. And those ways of responding may, in fact, have been the best optimal choice when we were making them. But we're not locked into them unless we choose to be. And so having the ability to make a better choice now, that's essential. And isn't that what teshuvah is? Isn't teshuvah the ability not simply to respond the way we've always responded, but instead to be able to say, I don't have to do a response this way. I'm going to respond differently now because I'm different now, because this circumstance is different now, because you're not my mom or my dad, and I'm not a powerless 9-year-old, right? So So Isaiah's holding that out. The feelings are real, but you don't have to respond the way you've always done. I note how they fare and will heal them. I will guide them and mete out solace to them and to the mourners among them. Heartening, comforting words. Shalom, shalom, l'rachok ulkarov. It will be well with the far and near, said the Holy One, and I will heal them. So a couple thoughts here. Our stubbornness is something that needs healing, right? There is a mismatch between holding on to patterns and responses that no longer serve and having the ability to get on the balcony, notice that, and let it go. And Isaiah is saying that God is the force to let us do that. That if we can trust in God's love, we can get on the balcony and let go of bad adaptations. And by bad, I just mean they no longer serve, right? We can find the adaptations that will help us now. And that's what healing is, that God will guide us to those, and that in the end, there are comforting, healing words. And that shalom, shalom, l'rachok ulkarov, for me, has a certain resonance. For those of you who are close to me in age and who went to JTS, you will remember that Chancellor Cohen, alav hashalom, used to do every chancellor's breakfast. He would open with those words from Isaiah. Shalom, shalom to the far and near, right? But it's some of Isaiah's most powerful words, right? That there is shalom to be had. And whether you are spiritually close or distant, whether you are geographically close or distant, there is shalom to be had. And that God is the voice echoing that shalom, holding it out for us, allowing us to remember it. Amy, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to ask you, one of the things that gets in my way about this text, and I'm asking you as Mr. Process Theology, is that it feels like the big man in the sky, swooping down to heal us, save us, etc. And so I know that you don't necessarily believe that, and I believe not all of us necessarily believe that metaphor that used to work doesn't work for us anymore. It's hard for me to get past that in these texts.
Yes.
How do you get past that in these texts?
So maybe it's a measure of your integrity and my lack of it, but I read these as poetry, right? So we all filter our experience of the divine, and I believe we all do experience the divine, but there's no way to encounter that experience except through our own frameworks. And so Isaiah's using the framework of his time, right? I've been struck in this age of new coronations that the image of monarch for God is actually an insult. And the better you, apology to any monarchists among you. Imagine my surprise to find that in England, many of our colleagues think monarchy is a good idea. It's an insult to the divine to compare God to a king, and it doesn't work anymore. It breaks on gender lines for me. It breaks on power lines for me. Like it's a bad image. But I understand Isaiah saying something different. When Isaiah says that God is on high and yet to the contrite and lowly in spirit, if I could use a process image that you've invited me to, Whitehead speaks about God's earliest concrescence, which is prior to our engaging, and then God's consequent nature, which is after our engaging. There's an aspect of God that is utterly and completely transcendent, but because it's utterly and completely transcendent, it's not important to us. Like there's nothing we can do with a God who's ineffable. The only way we start to engage with God is when God becomes effable, right? And so it is the immanent God who is the focus of the process theologian's attention. But I think that's what Isaiah is saying when God says, I dwell with the lowly and the contrite. This is a transcendent God who becomes immanent. And the place where we encounter that divine is in immanence. So I don't see this as an up there, out there God. And I don't expect that guidance to be external. right? So partly what I'm doing by teaching this in a psychological, spiritual context, I'm inviting us to understand it psychodynamically, right? What is the internal voice of the divine? How does that hope manifest internally for you, Amy, for all of us, right? And I guess what I'm inviting us to is, I think we and our people get so blinded by our rage, frustration, sense of being threatened, life's challenges and disappointments, that it prevents us, it gets in the way of seeing the hope, of seeing the bigger picture. Our world shrinks down to our frustration and we forget all the good, right? I had a therapist 2 years ago who had a great line. I would ask her how she was doing and she would say, many things are excellent, which I just think is completely brilliant, right? And I encourage you to steal that. I use it all the time now. That's the divine I see here, right? I don't think those comforting words are thundering down from outside of us. I think they are bubbling up within us, but we need to give ourselves permission to attend. And that's how I see this Haftarah working. It's acknowledging our being buffeted around, and it's saying, and yet you still have a resource of hope and joy and resilience that is also in there, and you can find it and you can summon it, right? And that's where the divine is found, and that I do believe. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome is good. The wicked are like the troubled sea that cannot rest, whose waters toss up mire and mud. There is no safety, said my God, for the wicked. Now here I want to do this on two levels because this feels very powerful to me. There are people who stir up the mud, and they do that because of their own bad responses and their own PTSD. But nonetheless, they stir up the mud and you get filthy, right? And that's real. That is real. We will encounter those people and they will bump us out of our happy zone. They will knock us out of our joy, right? And what God is here saying, I think, is a deep Buddhist teaching. The kinds of people who fling shit are themselves covered with feces, right? They're living miserable lives, and drowning, they try to pull others down with them as an attempt to save themselves. And so what God is asking us for in a weird way is two things. One is, when you encounter those people, know that they are radically unsafe, not just for you, but for themselves. Their adaptation fails them all the time. They keep isolating themselves. They don't understand why other people don't get it. They seem to be sounding the alarm and the rest of the world is in blah, 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 right? And they don't care who they pull down with them, right? And yet what God is saying is, maybe we can have a little empathy for them. They're like the troubled sea. They're not doing that out of a place of power. They're doing it because they can't see a more constructive way forward. Right? And that doesn't mean you give into it, and it doesn't mean you make yourself at risk for them, but it does mean you acknowledge this is coming from a place of wound. This is coming from a place of pain. This isn't someone who's in full control, right? And in that sense, the mud that they're tossing up is affecting them more than it's affecting you. And that's also a way to then let it wash over. You know, the great thing about getting muddy is you can take a shower, right? And you can take a shower, and that's what God invites us to. God invites us to this mikveh. But here's I think this is completely brilliant. This is my favorite Haftarah of the year. Of course, I love all my Haftarot equally, but if I were to pick one that I love best, which I don't, this would be it, which I don't. Immediately after telling us there's no safety for the wicked, God gives us permission here. Cry with full throat, without restraint. Raise your voice like a ram's horn. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to shout. Sometimes the feelings are so strong, they have to be let out. Right? And Isaiah and God are giving us that permission. Why is it? We say it all the time, but the ram's horn sounds like crying. Right? And the rabbis aren't satisfied with that. They make that even more intense. It sounds like the crying of a mother who knows that her child has been killed. Right? That's pretty intense. And that means we have permission in our holiest of moments, as part of our healing, we have permission to scream and cry. We have permission to cry out, right? All of that is part of it. It's not separate from it, because that's the moment. The crying out is the moment that you declare to the people their transgression and their sin, and that's the pivot. That's when this Haftarah starts to turn. You have to hit rock bottom, says Heschel, to be able to encounter God. Right? You have to be able to acknowledge the suffering or the wickedness in front of you. And you have to be able to give yourself permission to whatever reaction you need to have, however you need to react. To be sure, they seek me daily, eager to learn my ways, like a nation that does what is right, that has not abandoned the laws of its God. They ask me for the right way. They're eager for the nearness of God. Now, this, I just want to percolate to you. It's amazing. This is in the middle of God telling us how we're screwing up. And God says at the moment, look, I get it. You're trying your best. It's not like you're not seeking me. It's not like you're not trying to do what's right. You're not, but you're trying. Right? And that's really important to own too. The fact is, good people can do bad things. Decent people can make mistakes. The fact that you come to terms with your own brokenness doesn't mean you're not a kind, loving, decent person. Ours is not a tradition of perfect saints. Ours is a perfection of people who don't stop trying to do better, right? And so we're being told here, look, I get it. You're all asking, what can I do? How can we do it better? It's just that you're not getting what it is you need to be doing, right? Because what the people have fallen back on is a caricature of religion, right? They think that if they just do the rituals, then why isn't that making them happy? I come to shul, I put on tefillin, I won't eat in anyone's homes. Why am I not full of joy? Right? And that's what they say, right? Why, when we fasted, didn't you see? When we starved our bodies, why didn't you heed? And here comes God's extraordinary and unprecedented answer, right? Because on your fast day, you see to your business and you oppress your laborers. Because you fast in strife and contention, because you strike a wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. So here, God acknowledges, yes, you're seeking and you should continue to seek, and that's great. Healing is going to come from that yearning, and what seeking is a recognition that where you are isn't where you want to be, that there's a gap between the vision and the reality. And it's a gap you're not willing to leave alone. You want to do something about it, okay? But then it also says, but you have all these bad habits, right? So in the midst of your seeking, you undermine your own search because you keep making choices that lock you in. So if you're going to fast, but you're not going to make the world better, if you're going to fast, but you're still going to be causing harm to others, or you're going to be oppressing others, or you're going to be engaging in conflict with others, that isn't transformative fasting. That's just not eating, right? And that's not how healing is going to come. And then God lays it out for us. Is such the fast I desire, a day for people to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast, a day when the Holy One is favorable? Let me just remind you, what day do we read this?
Yom Kippur.
We read it on the day when we're starving our bodies and bowing our head and lying in sackcloth. Like, it's really, somebody had an acute sense of irony to hand this to us on the very day we're doing what Isaiah says, this is bull, right? And so we boom it out. We even have, gorgeous sanctuaries in which we tell people, gorgeous sanctuaries, don't do it, right? Yeah, Rachel.
Thank you. I've always struggled with the word rasha here. It is so harsh. And I am also imagining the time when we didn't need to drash on this, right? That hearing this hearing the Baal Koreh, the Baal Maftir in the shul, reading this aloud had resonance.
Yeah.
And it makes me question, right, the recitation of Haftarah.
Yep. So part of our enemy on Yom Kippur is conformity and loyalty. People come to shul for non-theological reasons. They come to shul because Saba and Savta, Bubby and Zaidi went to shul. They come to shul because they want to stand in solidarity with their people or with their families. All of these are commendable. And they've read this every year, halfway, but they've never really attended. So how do we break open this text so that they read it as though they've never seen it before? And that means that before they start to chant it, we need to break their habit. We need to make this fresh. And so part of what I'm doing right now with you is giving you a handle to be able to present this text as, for those of you who are looking for the best self-help book, you're holding it in your hand if you just have the keys to unpack it, right? There's nothing you're going to hear on the Happiness Lab that isn't an unpacking of Isaiah, right? It's brilliantly done, by the way. If you haven't heard Happiness Lab, you're in for a treat. It's transformative, really amazing. It's changed my whole family. But she doesn't say anything that Isaiah hasn't said already. She just says it with empirical evidence, right? And that's praise of her, not criticism. But you need to give people the tools to see it. Have you before looked at this as a self-help text? Have you before noticed that in addition to all the many other things Isaiah is doing, he's telling us how to find calm again, how to deal with our own anxieties? It's extra, isn't it? I mean, don't you think this is amazing reading it in this way? It just opened up for me in a whole new way. So I think we have to help them do that, Rachel, right? Because the other thing I just want to be careful about, I don't want to overly glorify the past. Mm-hmm. In the shtetls of Europe and in the neighborhoods of Morocco and Tunisia, people were sing-songing their way through Isaiah and not really being transformed, right? And the number of us who know people who walk out of shul with yet another reason to look down on their fellow Jews. Well, I stayed in the synagogue the whole day, but so-and-so only stayed till 1 o'clock, so I'm a better Jew. Like, they say that as they're listening to the words of Isaiah.
And adding another level, the kavod given to the one who reads this Haftarah, mm-hmm. right, is often the same person. It's the exact same voice almost every year.
That's right. It is often. So the job of the person who's leading the service and not being the Baal Maftir is to open people's eyes, right? I love Jeremiah's image of circumcising the heart, right? That's exactly what we need to do here again and again and again, because we form a hard outer layer that separates us from the rawness of our feelings. And that needs to be peeled off. Okay, so we have a bit of time remaining, and I want to be able to try to get through this. So God says that's not the fast on the day that we're doing it, which I also just want to highlight means this isn't about guilt or affliction. And I can't say that enough about Yom Kippur itself. Yom Kippur is a day we wear white. White is not a color of mourning, it's a color of joy. It's a day of most intimacy, right? And God, in a sense, gives away the whole season. What's the first thing we do for the high holidays? The first gathering is slichot, right? We start the trial with the judge saying, you're forgiven, right? This isn't about sobbing and regretting and mourning and feeling guilty and worthless. This is about God's love is so strong, so powerful, and so reliable that all the flaws you are now noticing in yourself, God already knows, and God loves you. God does not love you because God doesn't notice them. God notices them and loves you. And if God can love you with your flaws, you can love yourself with your flaws. That's the core message of the day. That's the atonement that happens. Right? And so Isaiah is saying that, don't do that. Don't turn this into guilt and affliction. This is the fast I desire. And then some of the most beautiful words in human literature: to unlock the fetters of wickedness, untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It's to share your bread with the hungry, take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to ignore your kin. Right? At no point does God say it's to do Yom Kippur Khan in this melody as opposed to that melody. At no point is God saying how hard you should thwack yourself on the chest, right? Or how big your tallis ought to be, right? That's us. That's not God. Right? So what God says is, if you can really resonate to each other, if you can connect to each other, you break off every yoke. By the way, not just the yoke of your fellow, the yokes by which you oppress yourself, the ways you chain yourself without knowing it. Break those. I want you free. I want you whole. I want you connected. Dina.
Hi.
Hi.
So then, doesn't that then almost reinforce the idea that I feel like we get so much from people today of like, why would I go to shul on Yom Kippur? My Yom Kippur is spending time by the water reflecting. It's spending time with my family. It's going and doing, a march on DC. I mean, because I identify with what you're saying, right? Like I love this idea. Like, what if Yom Kippur was the day that we spent doing all of these things instead of sitting in shul, listening to us daven? Because that is, in so many ways, being in shul is the opposite of what God is asking us to do, or Isaiah is asking us to do. So what do we do with that?
That's great. Thank you for the honesty, and thank you for raising it. And I have a couple incompatible answers. I do not think that the reason to make Aliyah is because you have to sacrifice yourself for the Jewish people. You should make Aliyah if the thought of living in Israel makes you joyous and giddy and feels like a privilege. I do not think you should come to shul on Yom Kippur because you need to feel rotten for a day as a way of atoning for I don't know what. What if we rabbis start with the attitude of, I love being in shul on Yom Kippur. I personally do. I don't leave the sanctuary. I get there in the morning and I stay until the end. And I sit next to the Aron Kodesh the whole day and I do not move. And, me and Tevye, that's the greatest joy I've got. I love that day. But I do it as joy. It's intimacy. What if we tell people, great, you know what? If your Yom Kippur is spent at the beach, then let's talk about how we can make that a mindful Yom Kippur. My mother is a Freudian analyst and an atheist and a wonderful human being. Years ago, she doesn't for a moment think there's a God in the universe, and she hates liturgy. So I put together a packet of poetry, Jewish and not Jewish, including the Haftarah of Isaiah. And she got a bunch of women friends, and they sat on the beach fasting in San Francisco. I don't think my Yom Kippur is better than that. Great. Do it in a way that is mindful and real. And so if you have congregants who say, Rabbi, I just don't get anything out of shul, then what if instead of responding defensively, you don't insist that people eat the dinner you like. Your job is to help them find the dinner that nourishes them. So great. If your Yom Kippur is spent with family or hiking or whatever, then let's think about a way to make that day really Yom Kippur and not just another hike, right? Because my hunch is, sorry, one last thing, Dina, many of the people who say that actually don't have a Yom Kippur at all then, right? They just go to work. That's not Yom Kippur. So you want to come talk to me about a mindful outside of shul way of having the day? I'm there. I'm your partner. I'll help you do that. But I also want to say there's something luxurious about sitting in shul, letting these melodies float over you. You don't have to pay attention. I encourage people who want to bring a book, just let it wash in and out of you, and you attend and then drift away and attend and drift away, and use the day for a day of, you don't have to read everything we're reading. I think that there's a lot to be gained from encouraging people to try that, but we can't do that if they walk around thinking that a good Jew is in shul on Yom Kippur and anyone else is a bad Jew. So I think the first thing to do is to stop trying to be a car salesman about shul.
Thank you. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think my challenge would be I say that to people, that kind of thing to people. I feel like the majority of people would feel that way. Like if we really had that message,
yes,
I don't know how many people would be left in our pews because, well, some, yes, have a connection to the melodies and things. Okay. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. I feel like that's the reality.
All right. So let's dream together, could we? You and me? Because at present, there's a growing number of Jews who don't affiliate with synagogues. So whether we give them permission or not, that's what's happening. I think the question is there religious leadership? Is there rabbinic leadership to be brought to this moment? Right? There was a time where we said to people, stop shechting lambs as your form of worship. Right? There was a time where we came up with the Beit Knesset as a mode of worship. Maybe, and for some of us, that I'm still a Beit Knesset kind of Jew. I'm more of a Beit Midrash Jew. But maybe it's time for us to say to people, here are some options. Here are 5 ways to do Yom Kippur. I'll help you with whatever one of those 5 ways. I don't need you in my pews. I mean, I'd like you to be a member of the synagogue, and we'll come together at Kol Nidre, and then we'll have a break fast that should include everybody. But here's 5 different ways to do Yom Kippur. Wouldn't that be a revolution? Right? Wouldn't that say something strong to the world? Because at the moment, we do sound a little desperate. I don't know how to monetize my institution. I don't know how to fill my sanctuary. That's not God's problem. It's not their problem. And it's our ego problem, right? I mean, it's also a budgetary problem. I'd like to have a salary too. But if the issue is figuring out how to serve them spiritually, I can't help but thinking that the monetization will follow if we just stop being so defensive. And we've been in defensive mode a long time. And the good news about its failing is it's not solving the problem. So that should encourage us to try something else. And I say that as someone who is a member of at least 4 synagogues and who loves davening. Okay, but my mom loves opera. And I would sooner that somebody slit my wrist than make me listen to those people bellowing the way they do. I just don't get it. And she is happy as a clam, literally, to be sitting and listening to someone shrieking out 19th century Italian. I don't get it, but she loves it. And for me, and I've even tried to say, now we're going into Brad's therapy session. I've even tried to say to her, Mom, some of the guys who wrote those operas wrote the High Holiday liturgy. So if you come with me to Sinai Temple, to my service, there's a choir, there's an organ, there's a cantor. They'll be singing some of your favorite conductors, and it's in Hebrew. You can pretend it's French. You can pretend it's Italian or German. You don't know what they're saying. Just keep the machzor closed, and it'll sound like romance. No, can't do it. If it's in a synagogue with Jews doing it, she's allergic. Okay, back to our thank you. That was very cathartic. Melissa.
Super titles, Brad, for opera.
It's not about lack of understanding, my friend. It's that I can't stand much of the music. This is not to be like, I don't like it. You're allowed to like it. I'm not making an objective claim. I'm not saying people shouldn't go to opera if they like opera. They should. They should just, hawking me to go to opera would be like me hawking them to go to shul.
You can hawk me to do both.
Yes, you are one of those rare birds. Okay, let's keep going. So then shall your light burst forth like the dawn, and your healing spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall march before you. The presence of the Holy One shall be your rear guard. So look, the stuff that Isaiah and God are talking about: untie cords, liberate, share, attend to your body's needs, right? Hunger. Make connections with other people, deepen those connections. And if you do that, your light will shine, right? This is about thriving. This is about being your absolute best version of yourself. Your healing springs up, and the image of God being your rear guard brings us back to Exodus, right? That God marches in front of us and protects us from behind, right? But it's done by our connecting, by our transcending ourselves, by our being linked to others and rooted in ourselves. Then when you call, the Holy One will answer. When you cry, God will say, here I am. Look at that, a hineni on the middle of the holiest day of the year. But this is a divine hineni. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech. So stop relying on constraints. Stop channeling your life to social expectations, right? And stop with the evil speech. And I want to say the evil speech that wins in our time, in addition to the way we chew out each other and are intolerant of others' divergent opinions, we have a contest going for who's suffering most. How are you doing? I'm really tired. Oop, 5 points, right? Because if you're suffering worse, you win, right? I didn't sleep at all last night. I had meetings all day today. It was endless. I mean, like, you win. Great. Okay, you won. But what did you win? You know, you won a whole peckle of misery, right? Many things are excellent, right? What if we focus on those? And so God's inviting us to banish these things and offer your compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature. And then your light will shine in darkness and your gloom like noonday. Now here I want to hold out. What if we think of the hungry as not just people who need food, but of a human yearning for what they don't have? And what if we think not only of other people, but of ourselves as well? We are so hungry to be seen, to be heard, to be appreciated, aren't we? Everybody is, right? And we're all famished in that way. And there is a darkness. Notice he's acknowledging it's dark, but you can still shine your light, right? It's an inner turning. It's an inner turning, and the Holy One will guide you always. There, Amy, I think it's an inner guidance. Slaking your thirst in parched places, giving strength to your bones. You will be like a watered garden, like a spring whose waters don't fail. Notice that image of the spring. The water doesn't come from outside. The water is internal to the spring. It produces its own flow. And we're being invited to be springs of water, right? Self-fertilizing springs. And from your midst, you'll rebuild ancient ruins and restore the foundations laid long ago. You'll be called the repairer of fallen walls. I love that. I love that. Could we be that? Could we be Goder Poretz, right? Could we be the ones who rebuild those fallen walls? And what if we are the fallen walls, my friends? What if we are the ruins of what has been left? What if we are, after all these years, cracking and broken, but still beautiful and strong? You know, nobody goes to ancient ruins and says, somebody clear away this rubble. Who walks to the Acropolis and says, oh my God, this would be a great place for a shopping mall, which, by the way, it would be. No, there's beauty in the ruins. And we also, as we live our lives, we are those beautiful broken ruins. Right, which is to say, continuous with the past, a legacy of those who've come before us, but bruised, a little creaky, right, and yet worthy and beautiful. And then, of course, it ends with Shabbat, Because at the end of it all, the capacity to rest, the capacity to just be, to not have to improve, to not have to build, to not have to change, that capacity is the ultimate sign of healing. It's okay. You're okay. You're okay as you are. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to be anything. You can just be. That's okay. And that's where Isaiah stops. So I'm going to stop too. Any comments or questions? Statements? Thank you. Anyone? Anything? Rachel, you had something bubbling up there.
Yeah. I needed this. Thank you. And I feel that some of the laughter that we were all sharing was our light coming forth.
Yes, it was.
I want to name a synagogue. Go to our poets.
Yes, correct. Wouldn't that be amazing? Right? And it's the place, shuls aren't places for whole people, right? They're places for broken, beautiful people. Right? And if we can be such places, if we can help our people to trust themselves enough to love the brokenness in themselves, then they can love it in others too. Right? Wouldn't that be a nice world to live in? All right, I'll close with a bit of a personal story. Many of you know that I have a son, Jacob. My twins are turning 31, God. And Jacob, we all go to Ikar, which we love. And a couple of weeks ago was a small service. There weren't that many people there. And so Rabbi Browse offered to Jacob to open the Aron Kodesh. And one of the things about many people with autism is Jacob has a superhuman love of Torah. He has since he was a little boy. It was built into him. We get no credit for that. He just always has. And he has an acute sense of timing and memory. So he's been to shul every Shabbos of his life. He knows the service. And so he's the guy in the third row who's always telling people when to take the Torah out, when to close the ark, why aren't they singing? Like he doesn't get why people don't get it. So he takes the Torah and he's holding it. And then she asks if you want to close the ark. So he closes the ark while holding the Torah. And then the cantor hesitated for a moment. So Jacob launched the Torah service because he knew what, like the cantor was wrong. And being a mensch, Hillel, the cantor, didn't say, hey, wait, that's me, and try to rush to the front. He just stepped back and let Jacob take it. So Jacob led the whole Torah service, including marching the Torah around the sanctuary. And I sat there thinking, a place that doesn't see that as a problem, that's where I want to be. That's where we're all at home, right? And that's Goder Poritz. That's the broken walls, right? So my blessing for all of us is that that we all of us embrace the broken, and that we love the broken too, and that in learning to love it in ourselves, we can teach others that they can do the same. Thanks, everybody. Good to learn together.
Thank you. Yasher Koach, Brad. Thank you all. That was beautiful. Beautiful. Be well, everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Brad. Be well.
You too.
Ach.